The Strait of Hormuz looks small on a map, a narrow ribbon of dark water between Iran and Oman. But stand on the deck of a dangerously overloaded tanker at dawn, and it feels like a fault line. You hear the diesel cough, feel the swell underfoot, and listen to the radio crackle. Tanker Nassau. This is coalition warship. Reduce speed and identify. The voice is calm, practiced, but there is an edge beneath it. The thin human sound that carries when machines and politics collide. What we call an escalation here isn't always a headline-bursting strike. Sometimes it's a fishing boat taken over by men with rifles, a cluster of drones launched from a port you never noticed, a satellite ping that shows a shadow where two fleets pass by, not toward each other but watching. Iran, Israel, and the United States orbit one another now inside that narrow space, and around them spin proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthi units in Yemen, militias in Iraq and Syria, each with their own local grudges and global patrons. The result is less an explosion than a slow, grinding reordering. Alliances stiffen, channels that once routed commerce and diplomacy begin to clog, and everyday procedures, insurance for cargoes, routing for tankers, the price tag on a barrel, start to fray. In Tehran and Tel Aviv, in Washington situation rooms, and in the neutral corridors of the UN, conversations sound different. There are threats that read like chess moves, apologies that feel like calculations, and sanctions that are both punishment and bargaining chip. On the water, crew members joke too loudly to cover the fear. In port coffee shops, captains trade maps in hushed tones. We used to run this route blindfolded, one old captain tells me. Now you check 3 times, and still you sleep with one eye open. This is not a single thermonuclear moment waiting to happen. It is a new normal of chronic insecurity that shifts trade flows, boosts certain military postures, and hands influence to actors who know how to make small, sharp waves. What worries you most about the future here? Total war, chronic chaos, failing states, or a hardened regional axis? If you want to keep following this, like and subscribe for the next part, where we trace the recent attacks, who pulled the triggers, and how that quiet escalation could choke the world's oil. The water here looks deceptively peaceful. A flat, oily mirror broken only by the wake of a lone tanker, its name scrubbed clean by fearful owners. On the bridge, a tired captain squints at a screen. Blips, IS gaps, a fast inboard closing. 2 small boats closing fast, he says. No drama, just a soft, practiced urgency. Down below, a radio crackles with a terse exchange between a merchant crew and a regional naval patrol. A dance of warnings and denials, routine grown risky. Beyond that bridge, the region's choreography plays out in layers. On one level, precision strikes and headline-grabbing retaliations, drones over shipping lanes, cruise missiles intercepted by aging air defenses, an overnight raid that silences a port for days. On another, slow, institutional shifts. Insurance rates spiking, tankers rerouting around Africa, exporters quietly rerouting cargoes and contracts. Each incident alone could be a story. Stacked together, they become a new normal. You can almost see the actors moving, Iran calibrating pressure without tipping into full confrontation, calculating proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis widening the front with asymmetric attacks. Israel responding with selective strikes and covert operations. The United States projecting carriers and missile defenses but juggling global commitments. Diplomats wander between capitals on calls that go late into the night. We have to de-escalate is often the formal line, while the operational tempo on the ground tells a different story. The technical side is stark and granular. Anti-ship missiles trace low, invisible arcs. Swarm drones darken horizons like a mechanical flock. Point defense systems cough and flare under stress. Ports sit under the shadow of uncertainty, and commodity traders watch Brent and bunker prices like a pulse. For ordinary people, from refinery workers to truck drivers to households paying at the pump, these ripples matter more than the rhetoric. This isn't a single, clarifying moment of explosion. It's an erosion. Trade routes diverted, alliances hardened, peripheral groups testing boundaries. If that slow shift into chronic instability makes you uneasy, hit like and tell us below. What worries you most? Total war, chronic chaos, broken states, or a hardened new power axis? Stay with us. Next, we'll lay out the maps and frontline snapshots to show who is actually pulling the strings. The tanker's bridge is dim, the captain's face lit by a handful of blinking icons. Through the binoculars you can see a small skiff cutting across the horizon. Not yet a headline, just another contact on a day when every contact matters. Back in a quiet command room in Tel Aviv, an operations officer scrolls through drone footage from a night strike and murmurs. Patterns match the last launch window. In Washington, a deputy assistant secretary leans back, not breathing much, thinking in 3 timelines at once. Immediate retaliation, proxy escalation, and long-term posture. These are the moments when strategy becomes a grind, not a fireworks show. The story is less a single cataclysm and more an accretion. Attacks on commercial traffic in the Red Sea, precision strikes on weapons convoys in Syria, a Houthi missile that misses a warship by minutes. Each event nudges networks of influence, Iranian advisors tightening ties to militias, Israel refining its red lines, the U.S. calibrating freedom of navigation patrols with diplomatic pressure. Insurance premiums tick upward. Captains choose longer routes around the Cape of Good Hope. Ports reroute schedules. Economies feel it in delayed cargo and jittery oil markets long before diplomats issue statements. On the ground, proxies learn new rules of engagement. Hezbollah conducts a measured rocket barrage, watching for Israeli reconsideration. Iranian naval units test formations in the Gulf, practicing the layered denial that could choke the Hormuz chokepoint. Technology amplifies risk. Swarms of cheap drones force expensive interceptors into constant motion. One mine can halt $1 billion worth of crude. Yet the drama is subdued. A series of calibrated messages, not a single declaration of war. What's changing is the map of influence. Regional actors once on the periphery are now central players. Russia and China watch, nudging arms sales and diplomatic cover, while Gulf states hedge, paying for defense and courting alternatives. The result is a slow hardening. Alliances coagulate, gray zone tactics become normal, and instability begins to smell like permanence. Which outcome worries you most? A spiraling regional war, chronic low-intensity conflict, collapsed states, or a new axis that freezes the balance? If you want regular updates on how this plays out for shipping, markets, and strategy, subscribe, and next, we'll trace the economic shock lines that turn these naval maneuvers into price tags and policy headaches. The dawn over the Hormuz is thin and metallic, the kind of light that makes the sea look like a sheet of dull steel. On the deck of a Marshall Islands tanker, the captain squints at the horizon where a dark shape flickers. Maybe a patrol boat, maybe a fishing trawler. The radio crackles. Unidentified fast craft bearing 20 degrees. Closing. The officer replies in a voice that has learned to sound calm. We're altering course. Keep watch. There's no drama in the exchange, just the practiced motions of crews who have learned that survival is often about small, repeated decisions. That same patience, call it grinding strategy, has become the region's dominant tactic. Iran tests limits with ambiguous strikes and proxy launches. Israel responds selectively. The U.S. patrols to keep sea lanes open. Each move is measured, deniable, designed to avoid an all-out fight while still imposing costs. The result is a stretching of conflict across space and time. Rockets into the Gulf, mines in the Red Sea, cyber attacks on ports, a staged assault on a cargo ship that never quite becomes a headline. The spectacle many expected, a single, decisive battle, never comes. Instead, instability seeps into commerce, insurance premiums, and policy choices in capitals from Riyadh to Tokyo. In Beirut, a senior militia commander jokes bitterly over tea. We're playing chess with blinders on. In Washington, a Pentagon analyst flicks through satellite images and says, it's not about an explosion. It's about attrition, of will, of supply chains, of predictable routes. Traders watch Brent blink higher on their screens. Fishing communities recalibrate schedules. Shipping companies reroute around Africa and factor in weeks of delay. The energy market doesn't need a headline, it needs anxiety, and it gets plenty. This slow reordering hardens alliances too. Gulf states hedge, Russia and China maneuver for influence, and peripheral actors find new leverage. The story here isn't fireworks but weathering. A relentless remapping that makes instability the baseline. What worries you most about that future? Total war, chronic chaos, broken states, or a hardened new axis? If you want to keep following how these quiet shifts become decisive, stick around. Next, we'll trace the likely hotspots and who would actually pay the price. Dawn over the strait arrives like a held breath. Tankers silhouetted against a pale, cold light, crews moving like ghosts through metal corridors. On the bridge of a Liberian-flagged tanker, the captain rubs his eyes and watches radar. A cluster of blips, then nothing. Down in Tehran, a commander studies satellite photos and a map of choke points, fingers tracing routes that have never been more valuable or more vulnerable. In Tel Aviv, a war room hums, analysts arguing over the next target while a single line of text arrives from Washington. Calibrate, avoid escalation. Small decisions repeated add up. That is the new rhythm. Not an explosive, headline-grabbing war, but a sequence of calibrated moves, limpet mines on hulls, swarms of armed drones off the coast. A missile that never reaches its intended target because the defender's radar found it first. Proxy groups test reactions. A strike on a fuel depot in Syria, Houthi drones disrupting Red Sea traffic, Hezbollah firing a barrage across the border. Each action is measured to send a message without inviting an all-in response. Yet the cumulative effect is to make the sea itself a contested space, a place where commerce becomes a bargaining chip. Markets register it in quiet, persistent ways. Freight rates climb, insurance premiums spike, cargo is rerouted around Africa, adding days and millions to the cost of a single shipment. Refiners hedge, central banks watch inflationary tremors. Ordinary people feel it at the pump or in rising prices at the grocery store. Diplomats shuttle between capitals, issuing statements that sound firm and empty at once. The UN debates, sanctions are tightened here, loopholes patched there, but the underlying calculus shifts. Nations begin to plan for prolonged disruption rather than a single decisive battle. What makes this dangerous is predictability, everyone learning the limits of the other's restraint. Alliances harden not in public ceremonies but in whispered understandings and shared intelligence, while peripheral actors find room to maneuver and grow bolder. The result is an attritional reordering. Trade routes bend, influence lines redraw, and a new normal settles in that favors the patient, the adaptable, and the state willing to pay the steady price of insecurity. Which outcome worries you most? A sudden, catastrophic war, or a slow, grinding instability that becomes permanent? Tell us in the comments and stay with us for the next segment where we map the scenarios that could flip this fragile balance. And who would pay the heaviest price? The Strait of Hormuz feels almost banal at first. Ship lights blinking like a row of sleepy towns. A tanker's wake cutting through dark water. But there's an electric hush under that ordinary scene. Radar blips, whispered orders on a bridge, an AIS transponder flickering off. A captain leans over a chart table and says, half joking, "If they close this, everything stops." His mate shrugs, voice low. Then the world learns to breathe with less oil. The joke lands like a cough. We've followed the headlines, the strikes and counterstrikes, the messages between capitals. What's harder to film is the slow grind. Sanctions that strangle trade, insurance premiums that double, routes rerouted around Africa and time zones, economies quietly recalibrating. That's the real drama, an erosion, not an explosion. Proxies sharpen their tools. Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Washington trade calibrated risks. Regional actors test the seams of old alliances. Nobody wins a knockout blow. Instead, the map redraws itself in the margins. New corridors of influence, hardened blocks, and a dozen shadow fronts where logic is local and stakes are global. Imagine a global oil market that no longer assumes safe passage. Traders wake earlier. Governments stockpile. NATO planners and Gulf navies plot contingencies that used to be academic. For Europe and Asia, the cost is not just higher gasoline at the pump. It's inflation, slower growth, and political strain as leaders answer angry voters. For states in the region, it's a daily arithmetic of deterrence and revenge, where small incidents compound into structural change. So what do we watch for next? Not a single catastrophic showdown, but the cumulative effect. Alliances that harden, proxies that gain confidence, maritime routes that become permanent choke points. That slow reordering could lock in instability as the new normal, or it could prod fresh diplomacy before calculation becomes fatal. Tell us below. What worries you most? Total war, chronic chaos, failing states, or a hardened new power axis? If you found this useful, like the video and subscribe for regular, clear-eyed updates. There's more to follow as the region keeps changing, day by day.